Good evening. Welcome. This is Chuck Robinson, Chair of the Reading School Committee, and thank you for attending the remote school committee meeting of April 6, 2020. This meeting is being held on Microsoft Teams and is being broadcast live on RCTV. Before we start, I would like to take a roll call of the school committee members and staff attending, followed by a few words by me. Roll call as follows. John Parks.
Here.
Tom Wise.
Here.
Carla Nazaro.
Here.
Aaron Gaffin.
Here.
And Sean Brandt.
Here.
Dr. John Doherty.
Here.
Chris Kelly.
Here.
Gail Dowd.
Here.
Dr. Jennifer Stiles.
Here.
Jennifer Allard.
Here.
Joe Huggins.
Here.
And Linda Engelson.
Here.
Linda is here. I'd like to take a moment to extend our thoughts and prayers to the Reading community, our staff, their families, and the entire country while we navigate through this national crisis. To the extent that we're able, the Reading school community will be there to provide support both during and following this crisis. I would also like to thank our school and town staff for their proactive response and support through this crisis. I will not name everyone, but this includes our central office administrators, principals, directors, teachers, para-educators, and support staff on the school side, and our town hall staff, town employees, and the first responders on the town side. To use the cliche, it takes a village is appropriate, as this Reading village has been strong in their response and will continue to be strong in the aftermath. For our students, we're thankful for your continuation of your education on a remote basis, and we know it may be challenging or difficult to understand what is transpiring around you, but please know our community and country is in a different kind of war like we've never seen before. We are thankful to include you among our most important warriors and learn from this and as our future leaders. If you have questions or concerns, talk to somebody, talk to your friends and your family. If you see someone that's in need, talk to them and console them. We all need to be there for each other in this, and we're very proud of the way our students are responding to this. For tonight's meeting, our agenda will be as follows. We'll have public comment. As we are remote and only school committee and staff are in this meeting, we'll be hearing public comment via our email to the following address: D as in David, G as in Gordon, schoolcommittee@reading.k as in Kevin 12.ma.us. This will be available throughout the meeting, and we will read those comments at the end of the meeting with a written acknowledgement to the sender following the meeting. These comments will be posted on our district webpage under the school committee meeting sometime tomorrow. As for public participation to agenda items, we will allow the same manner, and we'll do our best to respond to these at the end of the meeting. Following public input, we'll have a consent. We'll hear any liaison reports, and we'll follow that by allowing our newly elected school committee members, Carla Nazaro, Aaron Gaffin, and Sean Brandt, a moment of personal privilege to make any comments they would like pertaining to the recent election to the school committee. Following that, we'll have a reorganization to appoint a vice chair of this committee, and then we'll have a liaison appointments, to those positions that were recently vacated by retiring school committee members. Following that, we'll have an update from the superintendent and staff on the school response to the COVID-19 crisis, as well as remote learning. Our next meeting is tentatively set for April 16th. That's 4/16, and that's next Thursday, a week from this Thursday. And at that time, we will most likely review and vote on an updated school calendar. We'll also have a discussion on kindergarten and rise tuition. I know that we've heard from a lot of community based on the letters that went out by the central office today. We take those concerns seriously, and we'll have that discussion at our next meeting next week. There's no reason for anyone to be concerned about losing a spot or something. We'll make sure that all of that is on hold until we have that discussion and come up with a final resolution. For committee members are asking questions on when we do the presentation, they will be submitting questions to me, and we'll recognize them to ask them. And the superintendent will either respond or direct the response to the appropriate staff member. As mentioned at the outset of this meeting, that's being held on Microsoft Teams with live participation by the school committee and attending staff, we will see how it works and adjust as necessary for future remote meetings. In normal times, committees were not allowed to vote remotely, but adjustments to open meeting law during this crisis has allowed us for voting. So all votes will be on a roll call basis tonight and in any subsequent remote meetings. We are now ready to begin with the agenda. Thank you. So first thing on the agenda is public comment. So obviously we're not going to hear that live, but feel free to start sending in the emails to our email. Again, we'll announce that at the end of the meeting. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda. Does anyone have anything they'd like to remove from the consent agenda? Okay, hearing none, I'd
like to make a motion to accept the consent agenda as written.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor, Tom Wise,
Aye.
John Parks,
Aye.
Carla Nazaro, Aaron Gaffin,
Aye.
Sean Brandt.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Okay, the next item on the agenda is reports. I will. Yes,
Point of clarification, you yourself did not vote, sir.
I said aye at the beginning.
Okay.
The next item on the agenda is the staff. Dr. Stiles, you have a report or tonight?
Yes, I do. I have an update which hopefully provides Reading with some good news. Thanks to the hard work of all the team chairs and the special education staff, we received our results from our TFM, which is the state monitoring system. that came in and did a review of all of our compliance. And at this point, they did not find any areas of non-compliance. And we do not need to have any corrective action or any kind of continued monitoring, which is amazing news for us. And our strategy of really just acknowledging all the things we were working on and showing the state the changes that we had made proactively really paid off. And at this point, if anyone's interested, they can see the report on the state website, or we also have it posted on the Student Services page. It is important to note in the report itself, it does note that there was an area of non-compliance in an indicator. However, that was resolved, and on our Student Services website, we have that letter acknowledging that as well. So we're very grateful to all of the staff who really worked hard to make sure Reading was in compliance.
Thank you, Dr. Stice. Ms. Dowd?
I do not have a report.
No other
Thank-
staff have reports, Mr. Robinson.
Okay. Now I'll go on to liaison reports. Former school committee member Dr. Dockster submitted a report from RCTV and the Reading Coalition, which is formerly our CASA, and those will be submitted as part of the minutes. Mr. Wise, did you have any reports?
Finally took myself off mute. Apologies. Seems like it's been a while since we've had a meeting. There's been a lot going on from a select board perspective and from a CPAC perspective, but nothing that's immediately noteworthy. I mean, that impacts school committee. There's obviously noteworthy things, but nothing that impacts school committee. So I'll decline from here.
Great, thank you. Mr. Parks?
Nothing to report.
Ms. Nazaro, would you like to make any comments? Carla?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I am looking forward to being on the school committee. This has been a crash course in baptism by fire, which I appreciate. I have been impressed with what I have seen from Dr. Doherty and his staff so far, and I'm going to leave it at that, but thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Scaffin?
Hi. I would agree with Carla that this has definitely been an interesting way to start on the school committee, but I'm really grateful for the opportunity. I consider it a privilege to serve the community, and I too have been really impressed by how hardworking our central office, our principals, all of our teachers have been, particularly given what's been going on the last few weeks. So I'm happy to be here.
And thank you, Aaron. Mr. Brandt?
Chuck, I thought we were going to first names. What happened?
We are. I apologize. I'm trying to figure everything out here tonight. So.
I know we don't want to throw too many curveballs at you at once. So first, just want to thank the community for the support and for the patience. These last few weeks have been difficult for everyone, I know. We're all under a tremendous amount of stress with, our kids in school and our work and personal lives. So I'm grateful for the grace that everyone has shown, and echo Carla. I'm happy to be here. The very good news for everyone is that we are around all the time right now. So if you've got questions or concerns and want to reach out to any of us, please do so.
Great. And again, congratulations to all three of you, and thank you. And from my perspective, I appreciate all the dialogue we've been able to have over these past few weeks, and you know, I appreciate you jumping in and you know, getting not knowing you were going to get into this right away, but you've all really handled things admirably, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So now we will do the reorganization. So I will take nominations for the term or the position of vice chair vacated by the retirement of Gene Borowski.
Chuck, this is Sean. I'd like to nominate John Parks.
Is there a second?
Sorry, am I seconding the nomination or am I nominating somebody else?
You can second the nomination and then nominate somebody
Okay.
else.
Okay, I'll second the nomination for John.
Okay. Are there any other nominations?
Chuck?
Yes.
It's Carla. I nominate Tom Wise.
I'll
Okay.
second that.
Are there any other nominations? I'll close we'll again do this by a roll call vote. We'll do the in the order of the nominations. So which is also alphabetical. So Mr. Parks, is there any? So I'll do roll call. Mr. Brandt.
Sorry, am I voting for John Parks?
This is to vote for John Parks. So
Aye.
okay, Ms. Nazaro,
Nay.
Ms. Gaffin,
Aye.
Mr. Wise,
Nay.
okay, Mr. Robinson, nay. Mr. Wise is in so Mr. Brandt, nay.
Hey, Chuck,
Sorry, does John get to
does
vote
John
on
get
that?
to vote? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, and Mr. Sorry, Mr. Parks.
Aye.
Okay, now that we'll take votes for Mr. Wise, Ms. Nazaro,
Aye.
Mr. Parks,
Nay.
Ms. Gaffin,
Nay.
Mr. Brandt,
Nay.
Mr. Wise,
Aye.
Mr. Robinson, aye. So we have a 3-3 tie. How do you like that for your first vote?
Coin flip?
So, if the committee cannot decide on, you could do a revote, but if the committee cannot decide, then you would leave the chair vacant.
So why don't we have each nominee just make a couple comments, a few comments about why they want to be vice chair, and then we'll follow that with a revote. So we'll start with Mr. Parks.
Put in the hot seat. I love it. So, Tom and I have both been on the committee now for the exact same time. I think we share very similar opinions on some things. I think there's other things we share very different opinions on. As far as why I should have the position, I've done my homework. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do. Haven't missed a meeting, and truly want to make sure the district's moving towards the right direction.
Great, thank you. Mr. Wise?
This is an interesting position to be in. Yeah, I would echo John's comments in that we've both been here for the same amount of time. You know, neither one of us has missed a meeting. I did step out briefly for a concert that my daughter was going to, but other than that, neither one of us has missed a meeting. Studying and whatnot, there's been a lot that's been there. I've looked at every single one of our policies. I've started a catalog of the dictionary of all those policies, which is a key determinant of what key portion of our role. I have regular one-on-one meetings with Dr. Doherty on a biweekly basis. I've asked for and had some different meetings as well with Miss Kelly, Miss Stice, or Dr. Stice, Dr. Doherty, and the rest of the team there as well on different occasions. So both inside and outside, studied, and I've been in every single meeting. I think it's also, we'll leave it at that for now.
So thank you, Tom. So let me I'll explain my vote. And so I think highly of both of you, and I'll just leave it at that. That's how I feel. My only concern is we don't have a policy, or we don't have but we kind of have an unwritten policy or rule that if you're in an election year, we don't generally put someone in a leadership position. So that's where I was coming from, John. You would be up for re-election.
Chuck, we've had many years where we've had people that were up for re-election in positions as looking at Jean as vice chair. And this is not a full year seat. This is through our next reorg.
Okay. I mean, you are correct that we've had but we've kind of migrated away from that in recent years. We have had people that were in leadership or in positions in an election year, but we have migrated again away from that in recent years.
Chuck, correct me if I'm wrong, but Jean was just decided not to run. This was an election year for her, and she was elected to this position.
You're correct.
Okay.
I think the only thing I would say about that, it was a bit of a unique situation. I mean, this is a unique situation as well, but in that particular case, Miss Webb and Miss Doxer had just stepped down from their roles. You and I were brand new. It was basically the two experienced school committee members at that point in time, with Chuck being the one who was not going to be up for re-election, and then Jean being the one who would be, being the vice space. So it's like this is John's point that this is theoretically a 3-month appointment, or until our next reorganization, which, you know, is scheduled for June at this point in time. I do think it's an interesting thing, though, if we were to think about that policy, and what are the options, you know, come June, July timeframe, whether or not a vice chair position there's been no tenure of it necessary that leads towards anything. But if it were something that would lead towards somebody being trained, or lack of a better way to say it, to make sure the relationships are continuous, that might be an interesting point to consider.
And just back to it is a short time frame, but I would envision that whoever is put in the role of vice chair, I would envision that person being in the mix to either be the next chair or be a vice chair when we reorg in June. Either or. I wouldn't say it's just a placeholder until a new reorg. I would expect that person would want to continue in some level of leadership. So that's why when I said you'd be up for re-election, I'm thinking that, I would assume you'd want to be in the mix at the reorg in June. But I mean, that's just, if I'm wrong, that's your call, but that's where my head was. So does we'll have another vote. Mr. Park, so we'll go in the same order for Mr. Parks. Sean?
Aye.
Aaron?
Nay.
Carla?
Nay.
Mr. Tom? Tom?
Sorry,
Tom?
Chuck. Nay, I put myself on mute. Apologies.
Yeah. John?
Aye.
Okay. Mr. Wise now is,
Chuck, did you put your vote in?
it was nay still. For Mr. Wise, Ms. Nazaro?
Aye.
Aaron?
Aye.
Sean?
Aye.
Mr. Parks?
Aye.
Mr. Robinson? Aye. Mr. Wise?
Aye.
Okay, congratulations. Thank you, John. And I appreciate it. And good luck, Tom. Well, now we'll move on to the liaison assignments. So again, this is primarily to fill the vacated roles by Dr. Doxter and Jean Borowski. So we won't fill some of them that specifically the ones that we won't fill recreation because John Parks is in that and assume he stays in that. And we won't fill finance committee because that's Tom Wise and John Parks. We have 2 openings for audit committee, and I was going to ask Carla and Sean to do that. Synopsis of what that is. So not every community has an audit committee. Reading does, which I think I'm proud of. I'm glad we have that. But that committee meets probably 2 times a year. They meet when the financial statements come out to review those, and then they also meet to give guidance to the auditors of what they would like to see them to test in their audit. So in past, as examples, in the past, the audit committee has requested that they test like the revolving accounts or the athletic fees or the school lunches, different. I know those are just school, but they also will review town related things. So the audit committee is comprised of 2 members from the school committee, I think a couple members from the finance committee, a couple appointees by the Board of Selectmen, and then also the RMLD. So anyway, that meets a couple times a year. If you don't object, if neither one of you object, I'd like you to be liaisons to the audit committee.
Chuck, just to be clear, for
Yes.
now, is this intended to be, 2 to 3 months to get through the end of the fiscal year, and then we're going to do a more fulsome review of this, or are you?
Yeah,
essentially
so I think what we'll do is, and that will be at the advice of whoever the chair is after the reorg. We could then reassign all of the liaison assignments. That would be up to the chair, or leave them as we're doing them tonight. So this could be a placeholder. You'd be in that role for a few months until another reassignment is done, or it could be for at least a year. So did that answer your question?
Yeah, and I'm fine either way.
Okay.
I am too.
Okay. So, Mrs. Engelson, we have Audit Committee, Carla Nazaro and Sean Brandt. The Select Board had 2, and it was Tom Wise and I guess Jean. I'm willing to take that on unless someone else feels strongly that they'd like to do that. Okay, Linda, I'll take the Audit Committee with Tom Wise.
Select board.
Select Board, I'm sorry. The next one up is the Ad Hoc Committee. The Ad Hoc that's reviewing the Human Rights Commission, and that is vacated by that was Pat Calley and Dr. Doxter. I was thinking that maybe Sean and John Parks would be interested in doing that, or not.
I'm good either
Fine
way.
with me.
Are you okay with that, John?
Yeah, I'm fine with that either way.
Okay. So Linda, the ad hoc will be Sean and John Parks. RCTV, that's one position. Carla, I was thinking you, but I did hear today that you might be interested in the Permanent Building Committee. I'm not sure when we meet again in the permanent building situation. Something that gets on the ground running right away. So if you're interested, I'd like to put you there.
Sure, whatever you need.
Okay. So Linda, we have Carla Nazaro for RCTV. For the CPAC, I would like Aaron Gaffin to take that one. And Tom Wise also is a regular attendance to that as well. So they do meet regularly, and very, very good, very strong committee, very good leadership, and very good direction. And I will really want, us to have an active role in that as well. So, Aaron, are you okay with that?
Absolutely, I'd like that very much.
Okay. Thank you. So, Linda, it's Aaron Gaffin for the CPAC. For the Permanent Building Committee, I was on there. I'll stay on there. And Carla is with Tom now, but Carla, you maybe expressed an interest for that.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay. The Salary Table Subcommittee I'm doing now. And Dr. Doherty, you and I spoke earlier today that we don't need to appoint anybody to the successor organization to Arcasa. Is that correct? Or
That is correct. They no longer have a school committee member appointed on it because they're no
Okay.
longer a coalition the way they were set up before.
okay. Okay, so that I appreciate everyone making that easy for me and accepting that, and again, that will be at the pleasure of the chair at the reorg, whether or not we stay with where we are now or change it up. So having done that, and we are now on to the COVID-19 and remote learning presentation update. Dr. Doherty. So questions with this will, the committee will send me a chat and I'll recognize questions.
Can everyone see the screen that I've put up the slideshow?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
Yes.
So thank you, Mr. Robinson. The way I'm going to present this evening is I'm going to be doing the introduction piece, and then different members of the administrative team will be reviewing their areas on the slides, and I'll introduce them for each slide. So before I begin, I want to echo some of the similar words that Mr. Robinson said earlier in terms of how challenging the last 4 weeks have been. It seems like so many years ago now that our last school committee meeting, which I believe was February 13th, none of these things were really on our radar. We knew about COVID-19, but we didn't know what the impact would be. And since then, so many things have happened, and they're happening very quickly. Sometimes every hour, something is changing. If you go back and look at all of the different communications that have gone out since late February and how it has progressed and changed during that time, it's just amazing what has happened in this short period of time. To that end, I want to give a heartfelt thank you to, and I'm going to start with the central office leadership team, who are all here this evening. Gail Dowd and Chris Kelly and Jen Stice and Jen Allard, for the amazing work that they have done, days, nights, weekends, right now a reality. I've used this analogy a few times now. We are literally building the airplane as it flies. You will hear from each of the areas tonight all the things that have been going on, and we had a specific strategy and plan moving forward. And now today, I considered today the second first day of school is what we really had. I also want to recognize with the central office leadership team, at the same time, I want to thank Mrs. Dowd, who has actually extended her time here a little bit longer during this crisis. Mrs. Dowd was scheduled to leave a few weeks ago and decided to, in good conscience, she could not leave in the middle of this crisis. So she has extended her time a little bit longer, and we all thank her for doing that because she has been instrumental in what has been going on. So when you have a crisis like this, you have to have a structure. And the structure at the town level, and you can see in this slide here, the incident command system structure. It starts with incident command, and then under the incident command, there are operations, planning, logistics, and other areas that need to work on and focus on different aspects of the operations. So the incident command team, as you can see there, has fire, police, Board of Health, schools, town manager. That group has been meeting on a regular basis. We had actually a meeting today with the Board of Health. We've been probably meeting 2 or 3 times a week, and it depends on, as needed, if we have to meet more frequently. Several members of the school department are involved as well, and you can see there on your right. Gail is involved with operations and planning. Mary Juliana has been instrumental with the health department. Julian Carr has been involved with planning, Andy Strutt with operations, and Kevin Gerster with operations. I would also like to thank Joe Huggins, who is not technically a school department employee, but has also played a key role, and Kevin Cabuzzi as well. They've played key roles in our facilities, our cleaning, and you'll hear more about that from Joe a little bit later. I also want to thank our building principals, who have also been working extremely hard, connecting with teachers, meeting with them on a daily basis to make sure that our second first day of school went as smoothly as possible. I want to thank our teachers also, who are doing an amazing job. They obviously have the same challenges that all of us are facing right now, having their own families, perhaps maybe loved ones that may be sick right now, and that they have to address those issues as well. So I want to thank our teachers and our other staff, our technicians, our food service, our custodians, our secretaries, paraeducators. Everyone has been working diligently behind the scenes and doing everything we can during this crisis. So I want to make sure that I recognize all of the work that everyone has been doing. So as with the town, we do have our own continuity of operations for education. We are following the guidelines from FEMA and NEMLEC, which is our emergency response regional system. And the purpose of having a whole continuity of operations for education is that all of us have clear roles and responsibilities, and we also have succession planning in each of the areas in case one of us unfortunately may get sick or is unable to perform their duties. We have one member of the central office leadership team and at least one other district administrator involved in each category for that very reason. The central office leadership team for the last couple of weeks now have been meeting daily. It's how we start our day, and we check in, go over each of the areas, get updates. In our district leadership team, we're meeting 3 times a week, and we include our directors in those meetings 1 of the 3 times. The meeting agendas are based on the different categories. So I'm going to review those categories right now. So the one obviously that impacts our students the greatest right now is the continuity of education piece. All of the learning the online learning, the remote learning piece. That's under the direction of Chris, and Heather Leonard and Allison Straker, our curriculum coordinators. Special education and related services, Dr. Jennifer Stice, Allison Wright, our assistant director, and the team chairs are the leaders in that area. Our facilities use and maintenance, Joe Huggins and Gail Dowd, Kevin Gersner and Kevin Kabuzzi. School-based medical services, Mary Juliana, myself, and Dr. Stice. Finance and business services, which also includes human resources, Gail Dowd, Chris Schweitzer, Jen Allard, and myself. Food service, Danielle Collins, who's our director of school nutrition, Gail, and myself. Computer and systems support, Julian Carr, Gail, Andy Strutt, and myself. Communications, I've taken the lead on that. And one that has been extremely important behind the scenes, which impacts both staff and students and families, is the provision of safety, security, mental health, and behavioral health services. Dr. Stice, Jen Allard, Lauren Sabella, our behavioral health coach, and myself. So that is how the continuity of operations has worked. What we've done here is a sample agenda from April 1st. You can see that the agenda items are broken down by area. And underneath those are specific agenda items, which change on a daily basis. This just gives you a snapshot of some of the things that we have been talking about and working on throughout this crisis, throughout this health crisis. So now we're going to start going to the specific areas to give updates. The first update is going to be continuity of education, and it's going to be Assistant Superintendent Chris Kelly.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I just want to echo Dr. Daugherty and Mr. Robinson's sentiments and send out positive vibes to everyone in the Reading community. I know that we've all been working really hard behind the scenes, and hopefully after tonight's meeting, the general Reading community will have an idea of many of the things that we put in place in the last few weeks. I also want to say that John's chart of the continuity of education include my two coordinators, Heather Leonard, who supports K-8 science, technology, and mathematics, and Allison Straker, who supports English and social studies. But in addition, the principals, the team chairs, Dr. Stice and her team, and Allison Wright, her assistant, have been working really hard together. So I just want to say that we've been working hourly, not even daily, hourly, checking in with all the various stakeholders in this. So as John said, today is the second first day of school, I think you called it, John. Yeah, so I equated today as my first day of school as well. We're working on, I'm calling it continuity of education rather than remote learning. Remote learning is a thing, and we are doing remote learning, but we're doing it because we're in a crisis situation. There's no question that if we weren't in this crisis, we would be in the schools, our brick and mortar schools, doing what we love to do. I have heard from so many staff in Reading, and I've been happy to be able to visit all the virtual staff meetings, and I hear over and over again how much they miss the kids and the schools and the staff and just what we do. So in light of that, our role is to really provide continuity of education. So for the families that are able to access our work, we want to really have a rich, robust programming for the rest of the closure, however long that is. Right now it's till May 4th. And there's been a lot of behind the scenes work that's been done to do that. On John's slide, I see it at home. This is the hierarchy of needs. I have been quoting Maslow's hierarchy of needs quite a bit. My video's not turned on. All right. Is it now? Can people see me?
I could see
Yes.
it, Chris.
Yeah, we can.
Yes.
All right. In any case, if you look at the hierarchy of needs, we go from the psychological needs to the safety needs, to love and belonging, esteem, all the way up to self-actualization, and then school. Those top tiers are where learning occurs, and everyone is at a different level. This is true every day. This isn't true just in a crisis. But our crisis education, we really created our plan with the principals and with the coordinators and with the student services department with really that in mind, that we can't begin to imagine the stress that all of the families are feeling. We know we're feeling stressed. So we wanted to provide a sustainable program that really had a lot of flexibility so that our students who aren't able to access education at this point, maybe they could rejoin it at some point. Maybe because of their unique situation, they won't be able to do it in the truest sense, that we would really have a program that would be nimble and reactive. So we've actually called our program in 2 phases. Our first phase ended last week, and that was really, we spent really the second and third week of closure on a big process. I know Gail talked about it at the select board meeting the other night. We reached out to almost every family in the Reading community, over 4,200 families, and we were able to connect with almost every single one to have conversations. And thank you to our staff who spent countless hours reaching out by phone, by email, by Remind, and asking questions like, do you have technology? Is your food source stable? Are you feeling okay? Do you need social emotional support? All of those really focus on that lower level of that graphic of the hierarchy of needs, of really trying to connect with families and have conversations about how we could support them. And again, I feel thankful to work and live in a community like Reading, where the entire community just bands together. And I know John and Gail have been working really hard with town hall folks to really work on that. And where, you know, Gail will talk more about the technology and the food aspects, but that really had to happen. In addition, we really started thinking about and working on what would online connectivity look like and what kind of platforms do we have and would we use. In some places, especially at the middle school, they were really already very involved in Google Classroom and had all of those things set up, which was awesome. At the high school, there were varying degrees. Some teachers use Google Classroom, some use the portal, some didn't rely a lot on either. So it was really a lot of conversations around what platform would support your work. At the early elementary level, we're still in the process of setting up Google Classrooms. So that phase 2 starts today. Over the weekend, Kate Boynton, the high school principal, sent the high school remote learning plan, which really comprehensively goes over what our thinking is, with really the tenets described on the slide, that we know we can't replicate the school day, and that our remote learning, or as I call it, crisis education, will look different, that we are focusing on practicing and maintaining skills. We know for a fact that our last day of school was really March 12th or March 13th, and that those are the mastery skill dates that we know, that most of our work from here on out, whether it's until May 4th or whether it's beyond, will be focusing on depth in those skills rather than on mastery of new material, because we know that not every child in the school district is at that place right now. And frankly, we don't really, you know, without having that intimacy in the classroom setting, we're going to really work on being very creative and look at depth over breadth. In addition, as mentioned a few times and mentioned in a lot of Dr. Doherty's communication, we really, one of our core values in Reading is on equity, and really students, and that we are expecting things to be offered So we're expecting teachers to offer activities and lessons and ways to learn, but have a lot of flexibility in which students can access those offerings as best that they're able. We already have families that are saying, I'm sorry, but right now we're both working from home. We don't have time to sit with our child. We're not going to focus on that. We're going to do our own thing. And frankly, we built that flexibility into our plan. In addition, the Office of Learning and Teaching, as well as obviously the Student Services Department, in conjunction with department heads at the high school and curriculum leads throughout the district, we are going to really be focusing on re-entry and what compact curriculum planning will have to be done. In other words, say we'll use third grade for an example. Third grade, on March 13th, that's where we were in third grade. We know that fourth grade is going to look different now. So if you have a third grader, their next year fourth grade experience is going to have to look different. We are going to really have to pull apart some of the curriculum guides, really all of them, that we've been creating across the district. And luckily we have most of them done, and the ones that aren't done are going to have to be done very soon. And really pulling them apart and really paying close attention to how can we assure that our mastery standards are going to be taught and maintained throughout not only this year up until our closure date, and then really for next year as well. So as I mentioned, Kate Boynton sent the high school plan out yesterday. Some of the key components of that is the schedule. For those of you that don't have high school students, we looked at the A to G block schedule, and on, for instance, on Mondays and Wednesdays, A block A, B, C, and D will have activities on Mondays and Wednesdays. On Tuesdays, E, F, and G will have on Tuesdays and Thursdays. And then Friday is going to be office hours. And office hours at every level may look different. It may be an opportunity to connect via online through Google Classroom or one of the platforms. It may be an opportunity to answer many emails from students or from families. It may be phone calls or live conversations with people. That's going to look very different, but we are really asking all teachers pre-K to 12 to have office hours as part of their regular schedule. I know that the middle school remote learning plans went out this afternoon, I believe. They have an overarching document that went out to middle school families that talked about what the student experience would look like. In addition, every team at the middle school will be sending out their own schedule because they're not all going to be the same. But just in a nutshell, the student experience at the middle school will be enough work to engage for approximately half of the school day. That's pretty much the rule of thumb at every level. They will be offering 2 to 3 core subjects per day with at least one enrichment choice. So they didn't really do their blocks the same as the high school, like A block, B block, C block. They did it as the core subjects, and then the enrichments, which are art, music, and wellness, they will be choice offerings each week. Obviously, we're going to still strongly recommend that our students that are involved in the arts, especially music, practice this smart music. And then they have lots of other choice activities. At the elementary level, they will be sending out the structure of that. Obviously, because K to 5 is such a range, we're going to see a very big difference in what that's going to look like. Really, the corresponding to families is going to really be on judging what your child can do independently, and realize that there may not be a lot of have-tos, that we are going to offer continuity of learning, and we're really hoping through multiple supports that all children in K to 5 will be able to access what we're offering, but realizing that it is not a mandate, knowing that especially at the elementary level, screen time may be limited, obviously, attention spans may be different, and parents who are working remotely may not be able to sit with them for half of a school day. And a lot of the the same as what homework would be, that isn't always possible. We've also worked very closely with the Rise Preschool, and they are continuing with a full cadre of activities, which they will be sending out in the coming days as well. Or maybe they sent them out today. Is that true, John?
Yeah.
Did Rise sent them out today? Kind of exciting for the preschool. They are doing their weeks by theme. So all of their activities will be under one theme, which I think is very exciting for both the preschool teachers and the students. As far as grades at the middle school and high school, they have determined, both the middle school principals and the high school principal determined, similar to a lot of other communities, that we are going to have term 3 and term 4 wrapped together into one grade, and that students will be graded on a pass, and complete rating. So what that means is if you don't participate at all, you would get a pass and complete, and then at a later date we would follow up on what you may need to do to pass those courses, knowing that again we don't know what families are dealing with, whether internet connection is an issue, whether financial or food instability is a concern right now, or frankly that they or somebody in their family may be sick right now. So we wanted to provide a lot of support around that. At the elementary level, we are not doing summative assessments. And at this point, unless we were to go back and have a further conversation, we're not planning on doing third quarter report cards. We'll figure out some way to communicate with parents about things that they can work on or things that they can consider, especially over the summer. But we haven't really determined what that would look like. As far as our standards-based report card, we won't plan to use that exact model. So I know that's a lot. That was kind of 10 minutes of our continuity of education from pre-K to 12. If there are any questions, feel free to ask them.
So we'll use the chat. If anyone has a question, just let me know. Mr. Wise.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. Ms. Kelly, do we have any numbers, and maybe, or sorry, I guess it's supposed to be directed to Dr. Doherty first. So do we have any numbers in terms of children that we are needing to help with from a lunch perspective, from a computer distribution perspective, or anything else like that? Speaking of the equity side of this thing, do we have any numbers yet in terms of the percentage of the population or anything else like that?
So Mrs. Dowd can answer that question.
Do you want me to answer it now or wait till we get to it in the presentation?
Yeah, it is part of her presentation.
Can you hold, Tom, till we get to that?
Certainly can hold. Didn't realize it. Thank you.
Sean, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wonder if Dr. Doherty or Chris, if somebody could just highlight some of the obstacles. And I know you guys have been working incredibly hard. Some of the obstacles, some of the challenges we ran into getting from the date of the closure until the point where we are today, where we're able to launch this new remote learning plan.
So I can start, and then I can have Chris, or it may be actually others as well, intervene. So as we began this, first of all, I mean, we were put in a situation where we didn't know what to expect. So this kind of happened from we were just going to stop doing activities to, 2 days later, we were going to start closing school down. So there were a lot of things we had to address early on, and Chris did allude to a couple of it, is we wanted to make sure that our kids were fine and our kids were okay, and so those connections were being made for the first few weeks. Obviously, we also had to build a remote learning platform, so that's been happening for the last few weeks. We needed to work very closely with the Reading Teachers Association to develop a memorandum of agreement as in terms of what it would look like, because now we were entering a whole new type of way of teaching and learning. So those were some 5 days, I guess you could call snow days, because we were in the process of doing all of that work and planning behind the scenes. As we entered week 2, that's when we started having teachers reaching out to students, connecting with students, getting the needs that we needed to get to those students that didn't have the technology, that didn't have the food, and other services. Trying to figure out, was this going to be a short-term closure, a long-term closure? We did run into some glitches with our video conferencing tool, as we sent out last week. Originally we were going to start using Zoom. We realized early on that Zoom had some privacy issues. And Microsoft Teams is new to everyone, and so we've been providing training for that as well. So I'm also going to let Chris say a few words on this topic.
Hi. So I just want to echo what Dr. Doherty said. Phase 1 was always supposed to, our original date was April 6th. So the first week, we sort of organized ourselves during what we would have called snow days, and then really built our platform for how are we going to reach out, how are we going to keep track of our needs, what kind of resource activities are we going to build, starting to work on centralized communication, all of those things, which I'm sure you realize, I mean, these are all things we hadn't done before. These were all new to us. In addition to everything John talked about the platforms and the technology pieces, teachers, when they left on Friday, did not know that school was going to end on March 13th. They weren't sure if it was going to be right away or if it was how long it was going to be. So we are still in the process of allowing teachers to even pick up some materials, knowing that you can't take everything out of your classroom. They really are just taking the most vital pieces so that they can continue to provide continuity of education. All of these things take time. I realize that there is a perception and sometimes an accurate perception that other communities started right away. A lot of the communities that I've seen, and we're very involved with our neighboring communities and hearing what they're doing, a lot of what they're providing really is more like our resource that we did initially. They just have it in a different format. Really, our continuity of education plan is one that we feel is more sustainable long-term for us. I make no judgments about what other communities do. I feel like if this closure does go beyond the May 4th date, we have a really solid foundation on which to build upon. And I feel really good about that. It did take some time to get that up and running, but I feel like we're in a really good place at this point.
I'm going to have Dr. Stice say a few words as well.
Hi, thank you. From a special ed perspective, some of the challenges that we ran into is when this very first started, the direction from the Massachusetts Department of Education was that these were not counting as snow days, which really stopped the clock in terms of our compliance. And then the state had to catch up when the federal government brought different guidance in, and so the state has been changing. So we're really meeting with the state every single week, and they are updating their guidance around challenge with is to kind of keep up with all of the changes that have come from the state level, as well as everything that has been said previously. And some of the other pieces that were really roadblocks for us right at the beginning was making sure students had what they needed in order to communicate or to be supported behaviorally. So we needed to spend those first few days really making sure students had access to their communication devices, to any we were making visual aids and first then boards that we could send home for families to use because they typically didn't have access to all of that information at home that they would have in school. And so we really needed to look at the compliance and the guidelines, which have now changed again starting this week. And how do we support the students when at first the direction from Russell Johnston really was just the same as Reading, which was that connection and connectivity. So we had some different challenges, but again, everyone's worked very hard to try to overcome them and work together to create a consistent plan.
Thank you. Carla had a question.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. I have a couple of questions. Dr. Doherty, thank you for giving us the information surrounding what some of the challenges were early on and continue to be. It's really important. We've seen it behind the scenes and realize how hard you guys have been working. And I think it's important for people to understand that you guys have been taking on a lot of different challenges to try to figure things out as we move along. So if I could just ask, it seems like we have had 2 memorandums of agreement with the teachers union. Is that typical for most districts? That's my question number 1. And my question number 2 is, I understand that, and I've seen the remote learning plans for the high school and for middle schools, and they look great. In terms of the one we will be seeing for elementary schools, are we going to be seeing more video chats with students especially I would think at the elementary school level, knowing how important it is for children to feel connected, sometimes I've heard so many wonderful stories of children seeing their teachers and feeling like they're connected in a classroom. And I think that's so important. So I'm just wondering if you think that will be something that will be more evident and that we'll see more of when the remote learning plan comes out for elementary school. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. I'll answer the piece on the MOA. So I think as we get further into this, more and more school districts will be having memorandum of agreements with their teachers unions, just because this is a complete change in the way things have been done in the past. You've gone from a traditional classroom setting, brick and mortar, to now a virtual environment. So there's a lot of moving parts to it. So I would say that for the first MOA, there weren't as many school districts that were involved with developing an MOA, but I think in this round 2 of the closure, there are more school districts involved with an MOA. I was going to have Mrs. Kelly talk about the second question, and then I know Dr. Stice wants to as well.
Yeah, hi. Hi, Carla. Thank you for that question. So we totally agree that we want students to connect with their teachers. And I do think we're going to see a lot more of that. I think one of the things that we're leaning against as far as equity is like turn on at 9 a.m. at this time, just because, again, if I'm a working parent, if I had small children right now, it would be impossible for me to get them on a computer at that time. So we're definitely leaning towards more drop-in schedules, like we're going to have a sing-along at this time. I know preschool's already doing that, or we're going to do morning meeting at this time, drop in if you can, and we're going to record it, and we're going to trying to build a model that's very flexible and very sustainable so that we're not leaving people out. I think that, there will be times where office hours may be drop in, you have some algebra questions, for instance. I will have a live drop-in session at this time that we will then record and you can play it later. I think, again, our teachers are really looking to be very flexible and nimble, knowing that the last thing people need right now is a lot more pressure of like, you have to be on at this time. Again, remote learning does look like that. And, there are virtual schools that do this all the time. What we're doing is crisis education, and we're just trying to be very flexible, but also know that that personal connection is super important. That's why our remote learning plan has always included office hours. And office hours is that connectivity. And frankly, the education is the connectivity, right? So the activities, the lessons, the projects that we're asking teachers to think about, they're all the vehicle to connect with kids. We know that everyone's lives have been ripped right out from under them. Even if you're not in a crisis situation right now, our lives as we know it don't look the same. And for children, and I'm calling 3 to 21 children, they need routine and structure and connectivity. It's part of the developmental process. So we're hoping that by providing a continuity of learning with exciting projects and lessons and ways to connect with your teacher, even things like I don't know if it's out yet, but if it isn't, I know most of the schools are doing videos. Parker had an awesome video today. I think I tweeted it out. So if you haven't gotten it by email, check out Twitter. But even things like that, really, kids love those kind of things, and families love to see their teachers. And it's just, I know when I have been involved in that, kids watch them over and over and over again. That's part of what we're trying to do, is build an infrastructure that allows for that connectivity. So absolutely. Your question is, we will see more of that. We've already had quite a bit in pockets, but I think in the weeks ahead, we're going to see a lot more.
Dr. Stice, would you like to say a few words?
Yes, I really would like to echo what Chris just said. As she mentioned at the beginning, we are really trying to align our messages for special education and general education. So I think you will see more of that connectivity in different ways. Sometimes it may be recorded videos, sometimes it may be, online meetings, and it will vary student to student. And to go back to one of the other pieces that what was a challenge was that, for example, our speech and language therapists have an organization called ASHA, and ASHA requires speech and language therapists generally to have 10 extra hours of training in order to do direct teletherapy and to do under that term teletherapy. They've actually been working very diligently as an organization to make some changes to that under this time, because we know kids are going to need some direct contact with their service providers. And so we are working with our service providers to make sure that they're connecting in ways that are meaningful to students. And so it may be a continuum of activities, but there will be activities in outreach that families will be seeing the faces of their service providers and teachers, and or connecting via phone, whatever works best for the families and the service providers together.
Thank you. Erin, did you have a question?
Hi, thank you. My primary question got answered by Chris, because like Carla, I had a question about the use of Microsoft Teams and videos with students. And thank you for calling out the Parker video, because that was a big hit in my household and actually made me cry this morning when I watched it. But I had another question, and I'm not sure if it's appropriate for now or when Ms. Dowd is going to be talking about resources. But I know we've been trying to connect with families who don't have a computer in the home to make sure that they have one. What about families? Have we heard from any families that maybe and whether they're facing obstacles, and are we in a position to support those types of situations as well?
So Mrs. Dowd can address that when we do the technology slide.
Okay.
So I have a question. I think maybe this goes to Chris, John. One of the things that sticks out to me under phase 2 is building plans for reentry. And, I guess you hear all this these in the news about the flattening of the curve, and I'm trying to be optimistic that, you know, is it May 4th? May 4th
May 4th. Yeah, it's May 4th.
is the date, and I don't know, and I don't know how. I'm hoping that all hands are on deck when it comes to those discussions about reentry, because I'm wondering, is there discussions about, you know, what's going to get left out, or how, can you talk about that, Chris, how they're going about that?
I'm happy to talk about that. So I am super excited to say that we are in such a better place in the last year and a half, because we have been doing so much work on curriculum guides and really paying attention to pacing and really working with teachers. And certainly we still have some work to do on that. But the way we would have to compact things, so say, worst case scenario, we don't come back this school year. We would have to then say, all right, after March 13th, anything that wasn't taught in those certain subjects, in every grade, in every subject, are those what we call power standards or mastery skills. Those are things that you really need to move on to the next level. So it could be a foundational mastery skill from a course like Algebra 1, or it could be a mastery skill from like 3rd grade reading, that in order to really succeed in 4th grade, you need those mastery skills. So typically at the beginning of the school year, every classroom teacher, whether you're pre-K or whether you're 11th grade, 12th grade, you're doing a review cycle. You know, you're reminding kids we're back in school, you're checking for regression, you're really doing a brief review before you go right into the next set of mastery standards. In this case, we would have to extend that review cycle, and we would have to really tease apart the last year's programming and say, all right, what were the power standards? What were those mastery skills? Now, our standards in Massachusetts are huge. If you've ever looked at all of the skills that you have to learn in each subject, it's really an enormous list. But luckily for us, we've done a lot of work in what are the power standards. So those are the have-to-haves. I always use the analogy of the bullseye, right? That's the middle of the bullseye. Now in closure the last couple of Wednesdays and really sort of looked at like, okay, where are you in English and reading right now? Or what unit are you on in math? And the good news is that we had a lot of continuity across the district. So we will really be pretty well set to say, okay, now we know in the last third of the year, we didn't get to these mastery standards. How are we going to make sure that those are infused? And it probably means compacting the year. So in other words, the 4th grade curriculum will also, if I use that analogy of 3rd grade, we're not going to be able to do all the review work and the mastery work from the remainder of 3rd grade plus the entire 4th grade, what we normally would have done. So we will have to do the same things and have our priorities and say, okay, for the rest of 4th grade, here are those mastery standards and here are those power standards. It's hard work, but it's not impossible, and it's frankly work that we've been poised to do through a lot of conversations across the district about what that looks like. And certainly at the high school, the department heads have been doing a ton of that work, and they are already starting to have conversations about what does that look like? How do we compact? And for seniors or for kids at the high school that are sort of ending a course, you know, how do we finish out the course year knowing that we can't quite tie it up with a bow, but where can we get it to a good place that we feel really good about it?
Great, thank you.
Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. Mr. Parks has a question.
Actually, 2, if you don't mind. One is more software related as far as, you know, are we trending between Google Classroom and Teams? What is our cost going to trend towards the end of the year as we're rolling this out to all students? And then the other is, you know, we've got to look also towards next year as far as students, whether they're coming in from other districts or our districts. How are we setting up as far as knowing that this year may be a wash, trying to get those students advanced even over summer sessions if we have a chance to?
So I'll I'll answer the first one first. We have a license through Office 65 with Microsoft Teams, so that's something that's already in our operating budget. It's no additional cost. Google Classroom right now, we're not incurring any additional costs, but we may have to moving forward as we continue to build the platform. So that's something that we're going to have to watch very carefully as we move forward. So right now there aren't any additional costs being incurred, but it may happen as we continue along. In terms of your second question about, can you repeat the second question, John? I want to make sure I understand.
Yeah, I'll even clarify it. As far as other offerings, we've got students that, we've got a cutoff date of March 13th. Are we going to look to offer any type of summer programs optional for students to close that gap that they may need, especially in the IEP 504 area, where they're missing that, other than the summer program that we already have in place?
So from a general ed perspective, we have no plans at this point to offer additional summer programming from a general ed perspective. I can let Dr. Stice talk about special ed if she wants to at this point on extended school year, or?
Yep, I'm happy to answer that question. One of the things that we will be looking at is as we start to transition coming back to our traditional brick and mortar schools, we will be looking at students that need additional services in order to help them continue the progress that they need to make according to their goals and objectives. And that will be through team meetings. So we are prioritizing our team meetings right now, and we are really going to be tracking what students we're going to need to meet on right away when we're coming back to school in order to address any additional services they need. So we are planning for that. And we will just be waiting for additional guidance as to when we're coming back and then how are we going to roll that out.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, John. So we're ready to go on to the next slide, Dr. Doherty.
Great. So I'm going to turn over the next slide to Dr. Stice, and why isn't this working? There we go. So Dr. Stice is going to talk about special education and related services.
Thank you. So a lot of what you're going to hear me say is really an echo of what Chris just talked about, because we are really trying to make sure that we are having the same approach and that students are having equal access. And so everyone has been very thoughtful about making sure that we are on the same page and we're moving forward in a positive direction. The leaders and the team chairs, central administration, and communication with our CPAC. Once we realized that we were going to be out of school for longer than just a week or two, we reached out to the CPAC and asked if we could do a weekly meeting with them just to check in, let them know what our thinking was, and get their feedback to make sure that we are really communicating and working within that era of transparency and consistent communication, which is very, very important to us. Because although we might not always agree, we want to always agree that we are focusing on the children and teaching and learning first, and that we keep that in mind. And that's one of the ways we really want to do that throughout this process. The Friday that we heard we wouldn't be coming to school, Allison Wright and I actually reached out to all the team chairs and said, can you please come to central office? They dropped everything and started to make a resource list for families. And they did an amazing job of that next week, reaching out to every Reading family where a student receives services on an IEP, including out-of-district families, giving them suggestions and things that they could do, and also double checking, did they need additional supports or resources. The other people that were absolutely critical during this time were our two BCBAs, Lisa Studer and Heather Grotta-Durbeck, and our AT specialist, Melanie Watt. They also were reaching out to families, providing support, reaching out to teachers to see what they needed in order to make sure everyone had access. And it was really, truly an amazing team process to make sure everybody was connected and that we were making sure everyone had what they needed. And so as we move into this next phase, the state really talked about two different models for providing supports. One was kind of providing supports and resources, which we've been doing since the beginning of this, and we will continue to do. And then their second model, which is newly introduced, is really that direct instruction. And so our goal is to really work with each family individually and figure out what works best for them. How are we supporting them? Because as Chris said, we've had lots of families who've said, could you please just stop for right now? We're trying to get dinner on the table and we can't get these emails or do this outreach. And then we have other families really wanting and needing to engage more frequently. And so we've been tracking that and we'll continue to track that. And as of today, not including just the outreach to say, how are you doing? Do you need anything else? But actual outreach to families with learning activities and answering questions. We've had over 2,570 contacts with families thus far. And we want to continue that to make sure that students are really working on their goals and objectives. And that is what special education teachers and related service providers are going to be focusing on, making sure that the students have access to the appropriate supports to continue to work on their goals and objectives. In order to do that, we need to develop a continuity of learning plan, and that's something that was introduced by the state last Friday. We sent out an email tonight to the teachers and related service providers, as well as all of the families. And in that, we really laid out some of our next steps over the next week. People will continue to get activities, check-ins. You'll start seeing maybe more videos and follow-ups, maybe some of that direct instruction time over Teams, whatever's appropriate based on the students' needs and where the family's at and the service providers. But that lives and what everyone can expect to see over the next few weeks. And it will also contain a list of resources and supports for all of the students. And that will be individualized for every student on an IEP. It doesn't replace the IEP. It is simply a plan to help us move forward during this time to make sure we are supporting the students. And those will be written over the next few weeks and sent to families. And we're hoping that it will help really provide a roadmap for where we need to go next. The other piece in this is that we also are really trying to be mindful of our staff, and that they also are coming up against maybe sick family members or family members that are working and they have to watch their children. So as Chris said, our families not only maybe can't access a meeting at 9 o'clock in the morning, but sometimes our staff can't as well. And we're also preparing for if they get sick and can't provide the services, we need to know we can continue to provide those services. And so we've really been working with the staff for the past couple of weeks on developing a bank of resources so that we really have redundancy in our work. So, for example, across all of our elementary schools, we have many special education teachers that are working on phonemic awareness. Each one of them doesn't need to develop individual phonemic awareness lessons. We can pool some of our resources, and then they can pull from them to then accommodate and revise and support the students. And that way, if a teacher isn't able to provide direct service, another teacher or professional can step in and continue that work. So we really want to be mindful of that continuation of service for students. And to that end, for all of our related service providers, SEAM has been an excellent partner for us. So all of the SEAM districts have come in together, and they are working on creating a bank of activities and resources for the students across all of the districts. And one of the reasons that started is one of our great OTs said, I don't have little kid scissors at home. What can I do? And somebody else was able to say, oh, I do. I'll make the video. You can follow up with the parents. And so people are really coming together and supporting each other, which is amazing. As I mentioned earlier, team meetings, originally the state had advised us, because those were technically snow days and weren't days that were official school days, they had stopped the clock for all of our timelines. And then the federal government changed some of that advisory. So we've been working on a way to prioritize our meetings and have virtual meetings. And we are finalizing our plans, and we'll be reaching out to families to figure out specific next steps and what works for them. One of the things that's important to remember is that we are not writing IEPs for this time period. The IEPs will continue, stay put rights are in place, and any new IEP we write will be for when we return to the traditional brick and mortar education system. The other piece that will be important in that is students that were under initial evaluations or reevaluations. We're really going to need to look at what's been completed and can we hold meetings based on what we have. So again, that individualization is going to be very important to make sure we are supporting all of the families and students in the best way possible. Finally, we've also been working on 504 plans, and there are going to be many students that their accommodations on 504 plans are going to continue, and we can help with that. And some students may need to have their plans rewritten during this time, and we're working on a similar plan with the building leaders that we are with the team chairs to make sure that we can do that in an efficient manner, and that we in for the staff. And we're being very mindful of students that are going to be transitioning to new schools next year, because we want to make sure all of their services are in place when we return. And as Chris said, you know, we don't know when we're coming back. We are absolutely planning for students that have summer services in their IEPs to continue to receive those services. But once we know when we're coming back, we'll begin to look at those additional services students may need due to what has gone on during this time.
Thank you. Did anybody have any? Mr. Parks has a question.
John, I think this is going to go right to Jen, but how are we following up with our OD students to make sure that their needs are being met by those schools?
Yes, this is definitely Jen's question.
It's actually a great question. We've done a ton of outreach. That first day, that first week, the team chairs reached out to them as well, made sure they had what they need. We're in the process of following up with all of the out-of-district schools to see what their remote learning plans are, because they're going to be required to have a continuity of learning plan for each student. And we want to make sure that that is in line with what we would consider appropriate, and are there any additional supplements that we can provide for them. And then we will be doing the same thing in terms of additional services while we are there. So, and our team chairs have been amazing in doing outreach to the families, and will continue to do so to make sure that the students have what they need in order to be successful.
Thank you, Dr. Seiss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, seeing no other questions, we can move on to the next slide.
Great. We're going to now move to Joe Huggins, and he's going to talk about facilities and maintenance.
Thank you, John. So on or about, it was March 27th, we completed the cleaning of the elementary schools. I'm going to back up a little bit. Prior to that, we were going, when we heard about the outbreak, we were having the custodial staff do disinfecting and sanitizing of all the surfaces in the buildings, sort of to stay ahead of things. And then when we went to the closure of the buildings, we immediately focused all of the staff in the elementary schools, and we completed the project on March 27th, the cleaning of the buildings. At the same time, concurrently, we were working in getting the Reading Memorial High School cleaned, which as of this weekend is 99% done. This week we started the middle school cleaning, which we're going through again using the same level of cleaning that we did at the elementaries and the high school to get a top to bottom cleaning of all the areas in the schools. We've gone to a bit different model, obviously, than like everybody's operating differently now, where we have the custodial staff on a rotating schedule coming in and doing building checks in the morning. And we're sort of timing that with any visits that need to happen to the schools if people need to get in, and doing a building check in the evening also, which is important because we don't want to leave the buildings unattended and unchecked. The custodians, while they were working and continue when they are in the buildings, are keeping themselves distanced from one another. The maintenance staff the facilities department, first of all, is in full operation. We're working staggered schedules. The guys are working apart from one another. We're responding to emergency calls. We're not doing any big projects in the buildings. We're doing the state mandated inspections, which still has to happen in order for us to make sure the elevators are maintained and the fire alarm testing goes on. So we're still doing things like that in the buildings, but we're keeping people apart while they are working in the buildings. And then if we have repairs to do, they're sort of on a targeted approach. They'll go into a specific area and the guys are cleaning up behind them as they go out the building. So really that's where we are right now. The middle schools will probably take clean top to bottom, and we're just continuing to respond. We're doing a different cleaning on the town side, really focused on the public safety buildings and town hall, more or less. Any questions?
Yeah, Joe, this is Chuck. Are we still the same staffing levels that we had before this? So I know we have some outside vendors and plus our own employees. Is that still the case?
We reallocated hours for the contract cleaning company. They were doing the high school. They've moved into the middle school, which was just reallocating hours they would be doing for the nightly janitorial, going into the middle schools to do those two buildings. The custodial staff is doing, on reduced hours, doing building checks in the morning, like I mentioned, and doing building checks at night on the school side.
So to my question, so with the custodial staff on, I think you just said, less hours, could they, get back to where they were by supplanting some of the contract staff or not?
In terms of the May 4th start date, is that what you're asking me?
No, in terms of, I think you said that you have the contract staff doing the building cleaning,
Correct.
and then the custodial staff doing the walkthroughs.
Correct.
But only doing walkthroughs is less hours. Can they? I'm trying to keep them where they were, I guess, in terms of number of hours. Can they pick up some of the cleaning or not? No.
I think in order to, we've had different deadlines that we've had hit us with, like the April deadline and the May deadline, and it's kind of a moving target. And the reason we reallocated the hours from the contract cleaning company is because, we just don't know. And they have greater numbers of people and different equipment that they use, so they can move a lot faster through the buildings. So that's kind of why we're doing it in that type of setup, is to get them to go through the buildings quicker than we could with our own staff, to be quite honest with you.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Mr. Wise has a question.
Yes, thank you, Chuck. Dr. Doherty, for you, or if you want to pass it off appropriately. If we have parents or students who maybe left something still in their locker thinking it was only going to be a 3-week outage, and want or need to get it now that the continuity of learning has changed from the last 3 weeks, will we plan for or allow for them to get in any way, shape, or form?
This was a question that came up earlier. I was going to answer at the end of the evening, but I can answer it now. The buildings are now officially closed. So we are not allowing anyone else to come into the buildings. We had today, I believe was the last day that we had staff, and it was done by a very specific schedule, come in to pick up anything left they needed for their remote learning. But at this point, we're not allowing anyone else to come into the buildings other than the custodial staff that's doing their cleaning. It would be at this point, with everything going on, and we've heard that the next 2 weeks are actually going to be very difficult and challenging weeks in the state when it comes to the pandemic. We need to keep practicing that social distancing as much as possible.
There's a follow-up question, if you don't mind, Mr. Robinson.
Yes.
Dr. Doherty, do we expect that might change if we have to change our schedule? If we were to say, cancel the rest of the school year, if that were to come out at the end of April or something else like that, I would assume at that point we would think that we probably have to open for a period of time so people get everything out of the schools, and then maybe do another cleaning afterwards or something like that?
If we were not going to come back this year, is that what you're asking?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, if we were not to come back this year, we would have to figure out how that would work. I mean, certainly we will give students the opportunity now. So we're not going to not let students get their belongings if the school year never reopens.
Mr. Parks had a question.
Nope.
No, I'm sorry. I'm looking at this.
Chuck, I have one more, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Again, Dr. Doherty or Mr. Huggins, have we seen any impact, or do we know of any impact yet on the modular purchase and the plan? I know it's way out there from an implementation perspective, but considering everything else that's going on, I would expect there's probably going to be some sort of delay, and maybe we haven't had a chance to investigate what that means for the year or anything else like that yet, but do we have any updates on the modular purchase and what that might mean?
So I believe Mrs. Dowd was going to present that, but I'll leave it up to you, Ms. Huggins or Mrs. Dowd, whichever.
Go ahead, Gail.
I was going to throw it to Mr. Huggins. I didn't know we were being all formal.
All right.
So we actually have been, well, he can't kick me under the table anymore, so I'll speak freely. So we actually did receive the pricing, which was very favorable. We're in the process of working through the contract side. What is getting a little bit tricky right now is clearly with what's going on right now. We're trying to work through the language of any liquidating damages or anything else if there are unforeseen delays in the construction actually occurring. As of right now, we are still planning on moving forward. We're just trying to work through in this new world what that will look like if construction, as we did see in Boston, some construction did get shut down. So we're trying to work with them to look at what this will look like in the new world, but we are still very optimistic and are still planning on moving forward.
And where do those get routed from?
Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Did that answer your question, Tom?
Yes, it did. I guess the other question, just as an add-on to that, Gail, if you don't mind, would be, is there a date by which we expect or need construction to start in order for it to be complete for the beginning of the school year next year, assuming we have a beginning of the school year next year?
I'm going to let Joe handle that one.
Well, we had talked to the contractor about getting them in before the end of the school year, potentially, to first of all, we need DPW to do some site work around the modulars to extend the paved area as an access road to increase the width so a fire engine can get around it. But with the goal of letting them do some of the utility and the site work out there on that play surface and setting up a true construction area around the scope of work out there on the play surface. So again, once we settle finalize the contract with them and give them a notice to proceed, we'll have a better idea of when we think we might take delivery on the modulars. At this point, I think the good thing about this project is it's 90% of it's outside work. Outside the building, it doesn't impact the inside of the building much at all, other than some tie-ins for some tel data and things like that. Fire alarm. We'll know more as we get further along. Like I said, we're working with the architect and the OPM on this right now.
Great, thank you. Is no other questions? You ready to move on to the next slide, John?
Okay, we're going to move on to Finance and Business Services, and Mrs. Dowd will be presenting this slide.
Great. It's actually going to be a combination of Jen Allard and myself. So I'll sort of quickly go through the finance piece and then flip it over to Jen Allard. So we early on moved to a rotating schedule within the central office. We have now moved to a very reduced rotational schedule, mainly to make sure we are keeping our staff safe. So we have people coming in on an as-needed basis, sorting any mails or delivery that has come in, as well as making sure deposits are being made, invoices are being processed. So it is very skeletal crew in the office. Again, it is a small office, so in order to try to keep the 6-foot distance, we moved to this model. It's working very well. We're all up and running remotely, thanks to all the help from Julian in his department. From a finance standpoint, we are having daily calls with DESE regarding how to handle some of our vendor payments. There's a lot of information that is coming out, whether it be via the stimulus package or some of the other items that are coming out. So we are going contract by contract to look at what the appropriate actions are. And we do anticipate coming back to school committee with a list of decisions that will need to be made on that. And one of the areas is a lot of this is surrounding continuity of operations to ensure that when schools do reopen, that all of our vendors are there and able to service us. So there's a lot of information, and we're still waiting for guidance from the DOR as well about how to handle some of these items. We have canceled all of our rentals. As Joe Huggins mentioned, all of the buildings have been cleaned and they are closed. We're working very closely with the town to make sure all of our activities and their activities are canceled through the same dates. And we are still making procurement for regular renewals and items that we need to maintain. And I work daily with the central office team and the principals for any other expenses that are coming up during this process. And I'll let Jen Allard go through her pieces.
Thank you,
Hopefully.
Gail. Good evening, everyone. I just wanted to, first and foremost, give just a general update on our HR department. We are, though remote, a lot of the work I've been doing along with Kristen Cohen, who's our payroll and personnel assistant, as well as daily, if not hourly, consultations with our central office team and other administrators. We are, continuing our services the best to our ability at this point from the remote standpoint. I do want to talk a little bit more specifically about, first and foremost, the Family First Coronavirus Response Act, or the FFCRA as it's being referred to. I want to give just a quick overview as to what this act is, what some of the impacts have been so far to us at RPS, and then move on to talk a little bit more about some of our hiring procedures. So, to start, the Family First Act was signed into law on March 18th. From that time, we received some further guidance from the Department of Labor on it, and still working to interpret some aspects of it. It's a little bit complex, and it's multi-dimensional, but we've been having a lot of conversations first with our central office team, with guidance of council, and then have been having many conversations with our district leadership team about it as well. Ultimately, it is a temporary act. It went into effect April 1st, and as of right now is set to sunset on December 31st. The act really has two key provisions. The first being the emergency paid sick leave, the second being the Emergency Family and Medical Leave Expansion Act. The emergency paid sick leave is a new law that would allow for 2 weeks of paid leave for employees who are out of work due to being directly affected by COVID-19. So these are for currently working employees. This includes telework as well. So there are actually 6 reasons outlined under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act as to a time in which an employee could utilize this type of leave. So we, as a district, would have to provide 2 full weeks or 80 hours for either quarantined, asked, and that's or in isolation due to COVID-19, subject to a federal or state or local quarantine. If they've been asked by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine due to COVID-19, if the employee is experiencing symptoms and seeking medical diagnosis due to COVID-19, and also if an employee is caring for a family member for those 3 reasons that I just referenced. So this is time aside from the employee's accrued sick time. So this is an additional benefit that the schools and the town would need to be providing. So this is for both part-time, full-time employees currently working or teleworking. So that is one area that could have some impact to us here. Beyond that, any of the time that they would need to take either for personal sick or family sick, we would be deferring back to either their collective bargaining agreements or separately agreed to contracts or offer letters of employment on as to how we would handle those situations. The second portion of this leave, which is the Emergency Family Medical Leave Expansion Act, which to me I think is probably going to have the most impact or potential for impact for us here, is some language that's added and expanded on the Family Medical Leave Act. So this portion allows for employees who have been employed with the district for at least 30 calendar days it allows for them to take up to 12 weeks of leave for the need to care for a child who is home due to the closure of either their school or to the closure of their child care service due to COVID-19. The employee would be entitled to 2/3 of their salary, and this again is available to anyone who is unable to either work and or telework. That's very specific about that. So I think it's just important to bring up, and again, we're having ongoing daily conversations about this and planning around it, but there is potential that we may see these requests begin to come through. Again, April 1st is when it just kicked in, so this is very, very new, and we're all working to navigate it around various districts, not just here in Reading, but I think it's important to note that we could see requests coming from teachers, requests coming from administrators, other staff members who are currently working or teleworking during this time, requesting leave for reasons beyond just personal or family illness. I think there are a great deal of our staff members and employees, around the country at this point who are home with their children. And I think we're going to see it an increasing challenge in families balancing, continuing to telework and also care for their child simultaneously. So I think it's important that, we're bringing that up tonight and just making, awareness around that, but also know that we are planning around ways in which we can combat some of, those requests. And if we have a significant impact here, I think to echo what Jen Stice and Chris Kelly were saying, we need to be flexible during this time. And I think, we're really working at this point, again, to build redundancy, to echo Jen and Chris again in the work and in the plans that we're creating for this, during this time of remote crisis type learning for our students. So I think that that's going to be key in this. And I think we're already building that into the plan. So I think that we're in a relatively good place from that standpoint. And I think we're in line with the guidance from Department of Labor as well as the guidance from the CDC about, having just a greater sense of flexibility during this time around the needs of our staff. So I think we're gonna work to continue, to do that and to come at it from that lens. Just so you're aware, I did, as I stated, at this time, relatively new, I put out we were required to give notice to our staff by April 1st. So a district-wide email was sent out by myself on April 1st, just outlining what the employee rights were under the act. So that has gone out. And again, like I said, we're having ongoing conversations with the central office team, with our district leadership team, as well as guidance from council on how we're working to plan around the new act that's just gone into effect. So I will move on to our hiring procedures. I thought it was important tonight just to speak a little bit about what we're currently doing in the realm of our postings and our hirings. I think it's very important that we continue doing this work as other districts are doing as well. I think it's safe to say at this point, we've definitely put a greater focus on the positions and vacancies for next school year, with sadly the uncertainty of this school year being so unknown. So we are aware, and I've had ongoing conversations with our principals and other department supervisors about open vacancies for this year. And, if we do end up returning, how we would need to address those. But at this time, we're continuing to post positions. We're continuing, as other districts are, to go through the screening and hiring process. At this point, that's being handled virtually, and our principals, along with their other screening, their screening committees for their positions. At this point, mainly teacher positions we've posted for next year. All of those interviewings and screenings are being done virtually at this point. I think it's also important to note that our onboarding will continue as well through a bit of an altered virtual platform. So we're continuing, if we have any hires coming through, to have them go through a virtual process, filling out the required paperwork online and doing it through that process. We do have our federal-based fingerprinting background checks that still will need to be done prior to their start, and we do that through SAFES, is the organization, and right now they are still running at a reduced capacity. So there's still opportunities for that, as well as our pre-employment physicals at this time. That's done through Quadrant Health Strategies. They've currently closed for operation for those purposes at this point, but we can move forward up until those points, and once those alter or are reopened, we'll continue the process. So I think it's important to note that even though we're in a time of crisis and we're in a moment that's very uncertain day to day, we are trying to continue those areas to make sure that we're continuing to put ourselves in the best position for when we do return, whether that's this school year or next. I also did want to bring up one other area of the hiring, just to note that I know we've talked a lot in the past about how we here in Reading can build our diversity, specifically in our teaching staff, but I think all around we're looking to grow that area to better serve our students. So I have been posting all of our teacher positions to Teachers Lounge, which is actually spoke about last time, I think, through a conversation with Linda Snow-Doxter in a previous school committee meeting, which is an online job posting platform that can help us reach a more diverse applicant pool. So things like that are continuing, even though our focus is really in the moment. I think it's important to also show that we're not losing sight of some of those goals that we've set for our district and for my department. So that is essentially all that I had for those areas. I don't know if we can open up, obviously, to questions at this point.
John and Jen, my question is I guess I didn't know as much about the FMLA component of the. That's big, and is each situation do you have to deal with representation on that, or is it?
I'll let Jen answer that.
Sorry, if you could clarify, Chuck, what do you mean by union?
Well, is that brought to the union in a case-by-case basis? How does that work?
So that portion of the act is through federal law. So at this point, that is again through guidance through the Department of Labor on how we're treating each situation. So no, an employee does not have to work through union representation in order to make that request. So at this point, I could have an individual come forward to me with that request aside, and I would have to be bound by what federal law is telling us at this point, which is that if employed for at least 30 days, you are entitled to request that time. I did speak a little bit about unions only because more specifically for our medical, family-based or personal medical requests, we do have some language in our collective bargaining agreements that may have actually greater benefit than even what the FFCRA has come out with, but specifically for the expanded family medical leave, that is driven by the Act and by federal law.
I guess the biggest component of that concerns me is not a financial part of it. It's finding somebody to replace somebody that's out. That's that's difficult.
And I think again, to reiterate what, Chris and Jen were speaking to earlier, is we're really trying to be conscientious of that in the plans that we're developing for the continuity of learning, and being flexible, in building redundancy, and really working a collaborative way, so that if that is to happen, that, we're not relying on a one-to-one model at this point. So we would have the ability for, whether it be other department members, other grade level members, other group members, of like positions, who are able to continue to help support, the continuity of the education. So right now, that I think is the best way, and the only way we can really approach that at this point. But I do agree with you, Chuck. I mean, we don't at this point have, a line of long-term substitutes ready to go for a leave of that nature.
Thank you. Any other questions? Guess you can move on to the next slide.
Okay, we're going to go to food service now, and Mrs. Dowd will be presenting this slide.
Great, thank you. So hopefully this will also address some of the earlier questions that we received. I do want to give recognition and acknowledgement to Danielle Collins, who is our food nutrition director, who just joined us late in the fall. She has been phenomenal. As soon as we found out that the schools were closing, immediately that following week, she started to, initially we reached out to all of our families that were on free and reduced to make sure if they needed any continued assistance during this process, that we were taking care of that. We then have been working very closely with all of central office, all of the principals, and now the teachers, since we've started the outreach, that anytime a teacher or anyone is hearing about any food insecurities, they are reaching out to Danielle and I, and we are doing outreach to those families. So we did want to let people know that we are providing grab-and-go meals for any family that reaches out to us. It is not restricted to just those on free and reduced, because we do realize that people's situations are changing. So we are now doing grab-and-go meals, which the packages are being distributed once a week for families. So we have it set up under the bridge by the vending machines, by the cafeteria, if families want to come and pick them up. Otherwise, we are distributing them to their homes. I would say the majority of them now we are distancing, utilizing gloves, masks, wipes. Currently, we are distributing, this is probably about a week old now, to 25 students, but we have seen that need growing. We also are coordinating daily with the towns to make sure, to the extent families are indicating that their need is greater than the lunches, that we are connecting them with the town in the food pantry to get them the resources that they need, and that has been working out very well. I'm happy to say we have daily conversations with the town, and we're both working with each other to make sure everybody's needs are being met. I'm also happy to report that the food services group has been working very closely with DESE, because we realized early on that the majority of these meals were not going to be reimbursable. I'm happy to report that DESE has been able to approve all the waivers at the federal level that will allow for reimbursements of these meals during this period, which is good news for us. Originally, we did not qualify. So Danielle has been working very closely with our program coordinator to make sure all of our forms have been submitted and that we're in good shape for that. We also recently have been approved to be able to do 6 and 7 day meals rather than just 5 day meals. So we are working closely with all the families to make sure that if they want meals for the weekends, we're also providing that to them at this time as well.
Is there any questions? Okay. Mr. Wise.
Really quick, and this may be a naive question, Dr. Doherty Gale, I apologize, but you mentioned lunches. Do we have anybody who's on a free and reduced breakfast? And would that be included and covered by this?
We actually do not have a breakfast program. So what we do serve breakfast at the high school, but we don't have a full-blown breakfast program throughout the district. But what I will say is we are including some breakfast items within the packages as well. We also, one of the items that Danielle coordinated is we did go back through all of the cafeterias throughout the district because unfortunately with school being closed for the first 3 weeks, there was some food that we did need to sort through, but we did bring any food back to the high school to make sure we're including as much as we can within each of the packets. But we don't have a full-blown breakfast program because we just don't have the numbers for that. But we are doing what we can to include those items in the packets to the extent we have it.
Great, thank you. Ready for the next slide?
Yes. Gail is going to continue. She's going to now talk about computer and systems support.
It's all the fun stuff. And hopefully this will address Mr. Wise's questions as well. So what we also did early on as part of our initial outreach that Chris Kelly and Jen Stiles were talking about is we did get a sense for those families that did not have technology at home. So we have recently, I think this morning we hit 50 students that we have deployed technology to. We also have worked closely with Jen Stiles in the special ed group to make sure any adaptive equipment that we need to get in the hands of the students or iPads, we've done that. So we are doing daily distributions again in the same location underneath the bridge at the high school. We sanitized all of the equipment. Everything is bagged up with the cords and everything that you need. We do have a form for people to sign off. We are looking to do more of that electronically, especially to the extent some of the families are not coming in to get the equipment. We are making every effort to distribute to people's homes. If we need to, we're leaving them on doorsteps and mailboxes, coordinating timing with folks. We've also been working very closely with Grant Hightower for the METCO students to make sure we're also getting equipment as needed to those folks. So we've gone through our first round, and now that we're moving into phase 2, we've been working very closely with Kate at the high school. We do anticipate getting another 25 computers will be ready tomorrow for distribution as well. Julie and Carr and his staff have been phenomenal. I think we have 3 of them on the call assisting us tonight. They have set up a help desk number that goes to all of his technicians where staff can call. It's fully manned. They get a live person to help to remote into their computers. They've been helping us learn some of the new technology that we're using. They've been setting up sessions for all of the teachers and staff to do individual trainings or group trainings. So we are definitely trying to reach out as much as we can to assist people. And as we're hearing any additional needs, we are working with the building principals to make sure we're addressing those as they come up.
Great, thank you. And, we have a question from Carla.
Hi, one quick question for you. What about web access?
So the challenge with web access is you basically cannot get hotspots anymore. We attempt every day. We've contacted all the vendors. They just do not exist, not from lack of trying. We have reached out to other districts. I know Chris Kelly has talked in her group. I've talked to my business managers group to see if there's any district out there willing to lend us any. Believe it or not, there weren't any. We have reached out to people with ideas and thoughts if they need connectivity at home, but unfortunately right now the hotspots are just not available. But we did send information about reduced pricing if people, want to try to get it. We have also suggested or asked if you have a neighbor in need, if you can assist your neighbor during this time period. I know it's a big ask to ask people to open up their own Wi-Fi, but we have looked at that as well. But I know Julian calls on a daily basis trying to get hotspots, but there's just none to be had, unfortunately.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, I guess we're ready for the next slide.
I think you had 2 more questions, Chuck.
Oh, I was going to go with Chuck. Ready for the next slide.
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, I missed, Aaron, I'm sorry.
It's okay, thank you. So I just wanted to clarify. So if a family feels that in order to follow through with the remote learning for their children, they need additional technology, they should reach out to their building principal?
Yes, good question, Erin. We are having them reach out to their building principal who are going through and I don't want to say assess the need, but I'll say assess the need to try to gain an understanding of what it is that they need, what the challenges are that they're facing so that we can make sure we are addressing those needs. The challenge we have is we are not a one-to-one district, so we want to make sure we are being fair and equitable in getting the equipment out to folks as best we can. But the building principals are the avenue we're having folks go through. And then Julie and I are in contact with them on a daily basis.
Great, thank you.
And Tom?
This may be not applicable, so please feel free to, push back on it a little bit. But I was looking at the acceptable use policy we have in particular, and in that policy, it limits email accounts and access from kindergarten through 4th grade. And maybe we want to say that's still effective, but I was curious to know if we've opened that up to a degree, especially with Google Classroom and limited parent access to Google Classroom that's out there, if we're planning to open up the access and set up email accounts for the students in the younger grades so that parents can help them get access to Google Classroom documentation in the elementary levels.
So I will start and then I will definitely kick it over to Chris Kelly because we've had a lot of discussions about that as well as with the tech integrators and making sure we're coming up with a plan that is age appropriate and whether we need to utilize parental email accounts versus child email accounts. But I know Chris has been working with the tech integrators, so
Yeah, hi, Tom. So you are right. We actually don't allow, oh, I don't think my camera's on. Hold on. We don't allow K-5 students typically to use email because there's not a way that we can really monitor that. Typically, they do a whole unit in 6th grade about internet safety and email protocols. We do a little bit of that in elementary school. We're really gonna continue to use that policy. I will say that as we move ahead, quoting that nimbleness. If we find in 5th grade or 4th grade, those 2 grades already had Google Classroom set up and kids were really using that, we may decide to up that if we feel that we're ready to do that. But I think the building principals and the tech integrators and I have started that conversation. And at this point, we're not going to be opening up emails for elementary students. But again, we're going to exercise the nimbleness and change our minds with the upper elementary as needed.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Ready for the next slide, Dr. Dory?
Okay. I'm going to present this one on communication. So obviously communication has been critical throughout this entire health crisis. And one of the things I hope you've noticed is that communication across levels has been very consistent, and communication pre-K to 12 has been very consistent in terms of the messaging. The strategy that we've been using since the beginning is that there's been a district message that has gone out, followed by the building principals and the preschool director sending out their own specific level information consistent to what the district message was. We are trying as much as possible to make sure that the message aligns with everything that we are doing, because what we don't want to see happen is have one building saying one thing, another building saying another thing, the district saying a third thing, and then there's even more confusion and anxiety and stress in a very difficult time. So since February 28th, we've had 9 what I've called Reading Public School COVID-19 briefings. In addition to that, we've had several other communication that have gone out that were not full briefings. You can find now, and this weekend we revamped our website area. Really the 2 tabs that are critical right now for families is the remote learning tab on our district webpage and the COVID-19 tab on our district webpage. And you'll notice if you go to the blue bar, as soon as you go to the district webpage and click, it takes you to the COVID-19 page. So all of the information is there now. We are aligning all of our communication with the town. We do, for the most part, get approval from the town for communication that is going out to our community as well as part of the incident command structure. If nothing else, it's informational and they have an idea of what we are communicating. So that has been a critical piece of this as well. So the communication piece, we're continuing. Obviously, there's always going to be some hiccups, but we've done everything we can to make sure that the community has been informed step by step on what has been going on. And I know Sean, I think, has a question.
Sean has a question. Yeah. Sean?
Yeah, it's maybe a request more than a question. So in one of the updates, I think it was around the 16th or the 17th of March, there was an FAQ that was published. And I think that FAQ is directly linked from this COVID-19 information page, but it hasn't been updated since the 17th. Some of the answers in there are outdated. Some of the questions we didn't have answers to then, we do now. I think the briefings are really helpful, but they, sometimes what you learn in one briefing is different from what we said 3 briefings ago. It would be helpful to keep that FAQ updated if we could. It's organized well. It's, it really is kind of the frequently asked questions that people seem to have. So if we could make first.
No, it's an excellent point, Sean. We've been putting all of our time and energy on the briefings, especially recently with the remote learning plan, but that's a great point. And I know that there's probably some additional FAQs that are going to be coming out shortly from special education, so we'll add those as well.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things that as things start to stabilize a little bit, as they are hopefully doing, we can invest a little bit more time there.
Sure.
Thanks, Sean. Okay, it looks like the next slide.
Okay. The last area in our continuity of operations plan is provision of safety, security, mental health, and behavioral health services. Jen Allard and Jen Stice are going to share this presentation.
Hi, Taylor. I'm going to start it off. So just to give kind of an idea as to an overall what the goal is in the work that we've been doing. We met last week, and when I say we, it's myself, Jen Stice, to name a few, Lauren Sabella, Mary Juliana was on that, Allison Wright, along with a handful of our school counselors as well, working in tandem to really produce kind of, you know, a one area that we can provide a multitude of resources, you know, for behavioral mental health and other services of that nature to families as well as to staff. So we have been doing this work since, well, I mean, even prior to this, but obviously in response to COVID-19, I think what some of the feedback we were hearing is, you know, all of these resources were coming from multiple areas, multiple different people, and though everyone was working to support and doing their best to get all this information out, some of the feedback we heard was that it was a little overwhelming to see all of this, you know, support and resources coming from multiple areas. So I think what we heard from that is that, you know, our families, our staff, they're looking for one area where, you know, they can go to find out information and resources for various, you know, safety, mental health reasons, as well as behavioral health reasons. So we met last week to start that work, which was great. In that meeting, we really, you know, were able to talk through kind of what I just did, what our goal was, start talking a little bit about how we wanted it, you know, this resource to look. And we, you know, from that produced a document that we're currently working on right now that I'll let Jen Stice go into a little bit more detail on about.
Thank you, Jen. As Jen mentioned, we have an amazing team that is really coming together to work on this, to centralize all of the information. And so we really started to think of things in buckets so that when people go to log on to this resource, there'll be a section for families and a section for staff. And then we'd encourage the staff to also look at some of the family resources, because we're all dealing very closely with our families these days, and they may be some carryover. And so some of the buckets that will be inside of each are going to be things like around anxiety, general parenting concerns. We actually had our phenomenal PTs reached out and we're giving some strategies around ergonomics and how you're sitting. And having been at this computer since 7:30 this morning, I know that that's a benefit to people, but we really also want to provide people with resources to support them during this time and to support their children. If they are really feeling stressed and don't know where to turn, we want to be able to give them those resources in a way that makes sense and it's easy to find. So as Jen said, we had this one meeting and we will be following up next week with the goal of at least having a rough draft of an email, probably updating Lauren Sabella's webpage within the next couple of weeks. And then
Great, thank you. Any questions? Okay, Dr. Doherty.
Okay. So, you may have seen this slide the other night when the town manager was presenting at the select board meeting, but I feel it's very important to emphasize it again for a couple of reasons. One is I want to just reiterate the relationship that town and schools are working together during this crisis. As I mentioned, the incident command structure and all of the staff that are not only working on that team, but on the different operations planning, logistics teams, we are clearly all rowing in the same direction. And so all of the resources that you see here are interconnected with the resources that we have available with the schools. As Gail mentioned earlier, she is in constant contact with Kerry Valley from Elder and Human Services and Kevin Bowmiller from the town, who are in constant contact with the Reading Food Pantry. We will be sending out information probably tomorrow on how people can help through donations of gift cards in 3 Dropbox sites in the town. One here at the central office, one at Town Hall, and one at the police station. So that information is going to be going out tomorrow. But you can see here that the town has set up 3 email addresses. One if you need help, one if you're willing to help, and one for general questions. And those go to key people on the planning, logistics, operations, or incident command team to be able to support people at whatever the needs are. There's also a telephone number that you can call in the town, which there's a voicemail system that leaves for 1 if you need help, 2 if you're willing to volunteer, 3 for non-urgent questions, and 4 to subscribe to the code red alert system. And then the town website is constantly being updated by Jane Willerman, who is the webmaster for the town. And you can see that that changes daily. So these resources are absolutely critical for anyone that has needs or is willing to provide support. So I wanted to make sure that those were highlighted just like they were the other night.
Thank you.
I do have some questions, Mr. Robinson. That
Yeah, so let's start with the questions on the presentation, and then we'll do the public input questions, comments after that. Right?
Yep. So,
I saw one.
yeah, so the first one, I'm going to go in order of the reverse order from when they came in. So the first one talked about, and Chris, probably this one would be yours. Does an incomplete grade affect the GPA or the pass-fail of the class?
So we're not doing pass-fail, we're doing pass and complete, and it will not go towards GPA. That was determined by the high school team already. So we don't calculate GPA at any other level. So the high school know that pass, incomplete will not be factored into GPA.
Okay. The next question. Oh, wait a minute. I believe Mr. Wise has a question.
Yeah, sorry, sir. Just a point of clarification, Chris, if you don't mind. I think the question also includes the incomplete side of that. So if the student does not finish the point to get to a full pass and they're passing complete, does that impact the credit? If not the grade, we know it won't impact the GPA, but will it impact the credit for the class?
So that has not been determined yet. It will not count towards GPA. I think our plan at the high school, and this was definitely discussed at a department head meeting and with Kate Boynton, the principal, was that if students have a pass, incomplete, we will then circle back to them for the pass incomplete to determine what were the barriers for that. What topics that we talked about, were there other things that needed to be done in order to get the credit for the course? So this is not a gotcha. We are expecting kids to work on the activities and lessons that are presented, but if they can't, we're going to work with them. But the reality is it's on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you.
Would you like me to continue?
Yes.
So the next question deals with kindergarten screening.
I can handle that too. Yep. So if we don't go back to school, kindergarten screening is required. It does not give the date on when it has to happen. Reading typically does it in the spring so that we have additional information in the spring before you enter kindergarten. Many districts do it in the fall after you've already entered kindergarten. That screening process is required so that we can really assess every child and look for things that may be outside what we would expect so that we could get them support as early as possible, but it does not delineate when that happens.
Thank you. So I thought those were the only two questions I saw on the presentation. And then there was a third question was for
Yes.
public comment.
Yes, so I'll ask the question. My quick public I'm reading now from the email. My quick public comment is this new school committee going to revisit the superintendent review cycle change that was voted on during the December 19th, 2019 meeting? This was a vote that caused a lot of public concern once it became known, and I believe it was said that it would come before the school committee after the election. I can't answer that one, sorry.
No, so that, that was something that I committed that we would have a discussion on, and we'll put that on the agenda for, assuming that, well, I mean, we're going to be, if I don't know if it's going to be the next meeting, because that I'm hoping that we don't do remote meetings for the rest of the year. I'd rather have that in a public meeting, but we'll get it on one of the agendas as we're back on track here with meetings.
Okay, I did have some questions that were sent last night, and I know several of them were answered, but there was a few, well, maybe not last night.
I didn't.
But I want to, it was about the remote learning plan and some of the components, so I want to make sure that we've captured all those in the presentation.
Yeah.
That's okay?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going through this as I'm reading, because some of them have already been addressed. One question dealt with, and Mr. Wise had already asked it about, would students be allowed to go back into the building? We had already answered that question. The second question is, how will grades, if any, be recorded or managed for quarter 3 and quarter 4 for middle school and high school? That's been addressed in the remote learning plan. Some of these questions were asked prior to the remote learning plan being sent out. The third question, is there an expectation that all content for the year is going to be covered in middle and/or high school? And if it is not, is the content next year going to be modified to include the lost content? I believe Mrs. Kelly answered that question earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Will any summer classes be considered for regular day students to make up for lost content? Mr. Parks asked that question, and we had answered that earlier. The next question, how will Reading Public Schools manage the process for grade 6 students taking tests to determine if the students qualify for Math 7-8? Given the circumstances, the middle school principals are, I'm sorry, this is the answer now. Given the circumstances, the middle school principals are in the process of developing a new process for this year's grade 6 students, and they will be communicating that process in the near future. Making more district-owned devices available to families where multiple kids may have to share a computer, or where the device the children have access to does not have a webcam. I believe Mrs. Dowd did answer that question earlier. Number 7, is there any part of the remote learning plan content that will require printing anything out? And what about students who do not have printers at home? Will the district be able to print out packets for such students? to answer that. Because our schools are closed at this point, we have limited capacity to print out packets for students, but because of the learning platform that we are using, most of the learning should be digital versus paper-based.
John, can I just add to that?
Sure.
Yeah, we're not planning on having like set packets or worksheets. In fact, we've pretty much explained to teachers that most students would not have access to printers. A lot of households don't have printers. So I would say with very few instances will that be necessary.
Okay. The next question, can the district negotiate any bulk discounts for families who may want to purchase an additional item, e.g. Chromebook at this time? Most retail outlets for such devices are sold out. Unfortunately, we are not able to negotiate any bulk discounts at this time for private purchase.
John, are we, and I may have missed it in Gail's presentation, but how are we in terms of inventory? I mean, I haven't heard you tell me that we're running low on stuff to loan out. Are we, or are we good for that right now?
I'll actually let Gail answer that question.
Okay.
We have had several discussions about that.
Yeah. Hi, Chuck. We actually are in good shape. We have distributed the 50 that I mentioned. We have another 25 ready to go, and we do have a good amount. We have 2 more stacks that we can go through. We're looking at which ones are the easiest for us to reimage, and some of our older equipment as opposed to some of the newer stuff we just purchased over the last year, knowing we're not certain when we'll be able to obtain the materials back, but we do feel we are in good shape and we'll be able to meet the needs.
Great, thank you.
I think Mr. Wise had a question.
Yes.
Thank you, John. And maybe this is for Gail as well, or Dr. Doherty, maybe yourself. But with all the materials we're loaning out, it's 50 now. If it becomes 100, whatever that may be, do we anticipate if we come back to school that we would have any negative impacts of that from, what they call the cows or anything else, where we won't be able to use those again in the classroom for a period of time because they then have to be reimaged again? Is that kind of part of the reentry plan conversation as well?
Yeah, I'll let Gail answer that question.
So for right now, Tom, we have not started to disassemble the cows. We are attempting to look at devices throughout the district that are easier for us to reimage and deploy. We are also monitoring because we do know there is a chance that we may not get all of the equipment back. So as we get closer to reopening, we would need to start to look at that and figure out what our plan would be. But that's why we are, trying to monitor which pieces of equipment we are giving out so that we can assess what would happen if we do not get it back, or when we do get it back, to reimage it to what it was beforehand. So Julian and I have started to talk about that as well. It's a delicate balance of wanting to get the equipment out and then trying to figure out if they say open tomorrow, how we do that. So as you can imagine, it's a delicate dance.
Thanks.
Okay, next question, will it be actual live teaching in any grades, pre-recorded? Is it at the teacher's option, or is there some standard expected for each grade? Really, because of the demands on all families, both students and teachers, most of the teaching will be what is called asynchronous and not live. It's stated in the remote learning plan for the district, and then at the different levels, teachers will be having office hours a few times a week, depending on the level, which will be opposite. The next question, will students be expected to follow a timed schedule in any grades? Example, if it is a day 3 in middle or high school rotation, will students be expected to log into Microsoft Teams or some other platform at that time to join the rest of the class? And there were specific schedules or suggested schedules that were sent out in the middle school and high school remote learning plan. So I would ask that parents refer to that. Those have been now sent out to get further information on that. And the last question in particular, how is the district handling paying for services that are impossible to provide during the school shutdown, especially services that are contracted, such as out-of-district transportation, use of consultants? What about stipends to things like coaches, advisors, etc., where the season is canceled or no extracurricular can take place? Are they still getting paid? Will the result in any cost savings for the district? We are certainly saving on not having to hire substitutes, for example, and is the district refunding parent-paid tuition for things like extended day and full-day kindergarten, which was possibly paid in advance for some months, but never took place like the entire month of April. So Mrs. Dow did answer a lot of this, but as she mentioned earlier, this is uncharted waters. And we are working closely with DESE as well as awaiting further guidance from the state on payments for services not rendered, such as tuition and transportation. As you may have seen, the State Commissioner of Education has recommended that districts continue to pay their transportation and out-of-district tuition in order to ensure continuity of operations. While no final determinations have been made at this point, we need to assume that we will be paying for those services actually could lead to further problems when school reopens either later this year or next year when special education, out-of-district placements, or bus companies are no longer in existence. But legally, we have to provide the services for the students. We are reviewing all of our contracts and agreements carefully before any determination is made. In reference to stipends for athletics and extracurricular activities, we are currently reviewing these carefully to determine what will be paid. In most cases, those will need to be collectively bargained, because they are in the collective bargaining agreement with the RTA. At this point, we have not received final determination as to what the spring sports season may look like if schools do reopen. It should also be noted that these stipends in many instances are offset by fees received, which may not be occurring if the season is canceled. As such, there would not be any true cost savings associated with not paying those stipends, as the fees would also not be present. It should also be noted that for staff that are paid for out of revolving accounts and grants, such as extended day, food services, kindergarten, RISE, special education teachers, we are continuing to pay the salaries of those staff, even though we may not be receiving any funds. At some point, we may need to use funds in the operating budget to offset the loss of revenue for these areas. With the uncertainty of the state budget and potentially the town budget because of this pandemic, we do not see at this time that we have a surplus of funds, and we are concerned about the end of this fiscal year as well as future fiscal years. So that's, I believe, all the questions that we have received.
Was that just a question or your comments?
That was the answer to that long question.
I might have been a little tired at that point.
Okay.
I believe Mr. Parks had his hand raised.
Yes, John.
I did. There's one other question that we skipped over from 213 today in regards to standardizing communication from teachers at different levels.
Oh, let me find that. Sorry. Oh, thank you. So the question is, in regard to the new remote learning system program, there are many different teachers communicating to students in many different ways. Some email the children only, some email the parent only, some email both the parent and the child, some assign through the portal. The disparity of communication and consequential parent stress is magnified by having more than one child. Parents are dealing with a new, confusing, and overwhelming system that takes an hour or more to check and recheck that all requests and assignments are accounted for. The superintendent should require one non-repetitive method of communicating the assignments for remote learning. My recommendation, the portal. That way we do not have to look for missing or duplicative emails in both child and parent are viewing the same assignments and assessments. So I can take a stab at this, and then if others want to add. So I think we are doing everything we can to find the level of communication that works for our staff as well as our families. And every level is going to look different. So for example, the portal, which is used more at the high school and the middle school, is not used as much at the elementary level. Google Classroom is used more at the middle school than it currently is used at the other two levels. Remind is used more at the high school than it is at the other two levels. So we also have to be mindful of the comfort level of the use of technology for our staff, and how this had to be ramped up in a very quick amount of time. So I think as time goes on, we will continue to get better at this. You know, as we said a few times tonight, that, you know, we're doing this, we're kind of building the airplane as it flies, and we're doing everything we can to make sure that we are reaching the needs of students right now. And as time goes on, we will get more comfortable with the different methods.
John, can I just add a little something to that?
Yeah.
So 2 things. That's part of why we're really asking elementary folks to use the Google Classroom, because then all of the connections are on the classroom. You log in, you go to your child's classroom, and the connections are right there. You do also you can be notified by email that there was additions add, but you can shut that notification off if you want to. The other thing is, every staff meeting that I've attended, and I've attended a lot in the last few weeks, the principals are really discussing with their staff about exactly what that email is talking about. Like, less is more. They don't want to hear from 15 people. You know, if they have 3 kids, they're going to get all these different emails. That's part of why the remote learning plan is organized in a way that, like, if you're at the high school, A, B, C, and D are on these days, and so that you're not getting 15 emails. In addition, at the middle school, they're putting everything in the Google Classroom. So again, you just go in there. In the next week or so, we're going to see way less emails. Right now, that through this first phase, we've been using email a lot, but we're definitely cognizant that we're trying to not bombard people with opening up their emails or having them buried and then getting involved in their own workday and then being like, wow, I missed 45 emails from Reading Public Schools. We're definitely aware of that.
Thank you. Sean had a question.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we're giving kind of a clear message to folks on this tuition payment issue. So, Chuck, you mentioned at the beginning that we're going to take it up as an agenda item next time, but people are looking at an email and a bill. What are we telling them to do in the meantime between now and when we have that discussion?
As I said that in my opening remarks, that no one's going to get taken off of a list or canceled and in the interim between now and when we talk about it on the 16th. It really is not on our agenda, so we really can't have a public discussion about it tonight, unfortunately. So as I said, we're not gonna, no one's gonna lose their spot or anything between now and the 16th when we discuss it. Is that the answer? I know we got a lot of emails on it.
Yep, I wanted to have you say that out loud because I felt like we had maybe some mixed messages throughout the evening.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's how it will be.
Chuck, can I just, I don't know if there's any other questions before I.
No.
Okay, so I just go from there. So I just want to re-emphasize the work that's been done up to this point. A month ago, school looked much different than it does now, and no one was expecting this 2 months ago when we were going through the FY21 budget process. So I really appreciate the families and their patience. I know that this has not been easy for anyone, I know that families' lives have been turned upside down. So we appreciate the patience that our community has shown as we have tried to move forward with this. I think a question that has come up a few times in the emails that I've received that have not necessarily gone to school committee, but I'm sure maybe you've heard that the questions as well is, you know, why isn't Reading doing what other school districts are doing, or you know, this school district or that school district? So a couple of comments on that. We're talking to other school districts all the time. I mean, we're on video conferencing with our colleagues, both at the superintendent, assistant superintendent, sped director, and business manager levels and HR director levels all over the state. There are very few districts right now that are doing true online teaching of courses. If they are doing that, it is because they had an infrastructure in place for several years and they had the budgetary resources to be able to do it. If you remember 2 years ago, we were going to cut foreign language from the middle school. And because of an override, a successful override, we've been rebuilding our teaching and learning for the last 2 years. So the reason why we are not at a place where those other communities are is because we are making up for the 5 years previous to that where we were continuing to cut teaching and learning. So we are doing everything we can to provide the best opportunities for kids with the resources that we have right now. So I want people to understand that. And the last thing I want to add, a nearby school district, which I won't mention, that has been doing one-to-one for about 6 years now, was mentioning to me in a video conference call that we had the other day that they're only getting 50% participation online right now with their resources. So although they have had those resources for many years, they're not getting the level of engagement either. So we're doing everything we can to get students engaged right now in the learning and getting them the resources they need and the supports. And that's what we're working on right now. And I wanted to make sure that people understood that.
Thank you. So again, as I said at the outset, our plan is to meet on the 16th, and you know, definitely no mixed messages from this seat right here. We will talk about kindergarten at that point, and nothing is going to be done in the interim, which is, you know, what 10 days from now. And, you know, we may end up where we are. I don't know, but we will have a discussion on the 16th. And I appreciate everybody's patience with this and working through this. And I hope everyone continues to do well. Their families are okay and all of that. Does anyone else have anything else they want to add? Any motions?
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
A roll call. I can see Sean's face. So, Miss Sean?
Aye.
Tom?
Aye.
Aaron?
Hello.
I guess that's a yes. Carla?
Aye.
And John?
Aye.
Chuck? Aye. Thank you, everybody.
Night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Thanks, John.